Welcome everyone to Success Looks Like Me, Graduates with Disabilities. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to have a wonderful group of alumni panelists to speak about their career and education journeys as it relates to being an individual with a disability. We'll start off by asking each of the panelists we'll start off with staff introductions first. And then after that, we will have each of the alumni panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So to begin with, my name is Kiana Dobson. I am an alumni from UW and I'm currently in the Master's in Clinical Rehabilitation Counseling program, as well as an intern at SuccessWorks working with the alumni relations team. We will do popcorn style if that works, and I'll go over to Brandon.
Thanks, Kiana. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Spoon, and I do marketing and communications for SuccessWorks at the College of Letters and Science. And I will popcorn to Beth.
Hello, everyone. My name is Beth Caravan. I'm one of the career and internship specialists at SuccessWorks. I advise students interested in careers in technology, data, and analytics, regardless of their majors. I will popcorn to Tessa.
Thank you, Beth. Hi, everyone. I'm Tessa Timmler. I'm both an access consultant and a transition services consultant at the McBurney Disability Resource Center on campus. So in my role as a transition consultant, I do meet and work with outgoing students to help folks understand their rights as a person with a disability in the career realm. And I just thank all of you for including me here. And then Nacie next.
Hey everyone, my name is Nacie Clerk-Ford. I work at SuccessWorks along with all these fine folks. And I work on the programming end of teams with Kiana. All right, back to Beth.
Great. Well, with that, I think now would be a good time to have our alumni introduce themselves, our guests today. We'll go in order by last name. So we'll start with Julie. If you can, so a reminder, your name, your current role, and if you want to give a kind of a 2-minute summary of your career journey, that would be excellent.
Okay. My name's Julie Johnson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. My disability is a mild form of autism. Some people call it Asperger's disorder. This can lead to extreme sensory sensitivities. And it's sometimes misunderstanding social cues, particularly when someone is tired and doesn't want to talk, and I can completely miss that. And all I could do is apologize because I don't always pick up on those things. After graduating from high school in 1985, I studied journalism at a private college. I was not diagnosed with autism until 2011, but I knew I had unique challenges. Due to autism-related social difficulties, I was not very successful in journalism. I worked any job I could get to pay the bills, oftentimes temporary positions, until 2014. Once I was diagnosed with Asperger's in 2011 and aware of what I was struggling against, I started looking for professional work that I could do. But I didn't really have a sense of direction until 2014, when there was an event that truly changed my life. My computer was infected with a virus. I didn't have the money to get it fixed professionally. So the only way I could regain control of the machine was to erase the internal hard drive, reinstall Windows on my own, and restore data from the backups. And I will say that's a challenging job for someone without specialized training. But when I got the computer working again and the virus did not return, I realized that I could look malicious software square in the monitor and beat it. That led to returning to college as a non-traditional student, where I studied IT security. After I graduated, I had a brief stint in a help desk role and then found a position in the UW-Madison Office of Cybersecurity. Currently, I'm a security analyst in testing and cyber defense. Is there anything else you need right now?
I think that's perfect. That gives a great overview, and I'm sure the students will have more questions once we introduce the other panelists. Thank you, Julie. Next, I think we'll do Mike.
Sounds good. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Moore. My pronouns are he, him, and his. So I work at the McBurney Disability Resource Center now as an access consultant. My path here has been maybe not typical of many of my colleagues. A little bit about my disability first. I have a spinal cord injury. I was paralyzed in a diving accident in high school. So I'm paralyzed from about the shoulders down. I can move my arms a little bit, really no finger dexterity. So high level quadriplegia would be, I guess, my diagnosis if we were talking about things medically. But yeah, paralyzed from the shoulders down. So I did go to college here at UW. As an undergrad, I studied history and I got a certificate in religious studies. And after college, I then went to law school, and I graduated in 2009. And then I practiced law at a big law firm in litigation, litigating big commercial cases and a lot of cases involving patents. But after doing that for about 4 or 5 years, I decided I wanted to learn about psychology. So I left the firm and I went back to school, and I got a master's degree in rehabilitation psychology. And when I finished that up in 2016, the job opened up at the McBurney Center. So I've been there for about 5 years. So that's, my last 20 years in 3 sentences or 4 sentences.
Thank you so much, Mike. Excellent summary. And then we will have Wendy introduce herself.
All right, thank you. My name is Wendy. I'm a little bit earlier in my career than a lot of the others. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a 4th year medical student here at UW School of Medicine and Public Health. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin under CALS, actually, in 2015, and I took 2 years off before going into medicine. Within medical school actually was when I was diagnosed with my psychiatric disability. And it's been kind of my passion to dismantle some of the stigma that people in medicine have around disability. So I founded the Disability Advocacy Coalition and Medicine Student Group, and we're doing some work around campus to try to dismantle ableism. And here we are. I am applying into pediatrics. So being 4th year, I graduate next year. And hopefully we'll be starting my my journey to become a pediatrician, hopefully in disability related fields. So that is me.
Fantastic. So that's a great introduction for all of our alumni. I will ask our first kind of starter question here, but a reminder to the students in the meeting here, you can chime in with questions whenever you're ready. If you want to ask your question through audio and voice, you can raise your hand under the reactions button on Zoom. There's that big button on the bottom that says raise your hand, and I will call on those as they, in the order they show up. If you prefer to leave your AV off and drop your question in the chat, you're welcome to do that. If you prefer to ask your questions anonymously, you're welcome to message them directly to one of our staff, and we will make sure that it gets in the queue for questions. So, while we let our students get oriented here, I'd like to ask all 3 of our panelists, how has your identity impacted your career path and your field? We can start with whoever's ready, or I can call on you if you'd like.
I could say that there's the way it impacted me personally was before I had the correct diagnosis. When I didn't know exactly what I was struggling against, I got into a field where I would never have succeeded because of the difficulty with social cues. But once I knew what I was dealing with, once I truly understood my condition, Then I could find a field that focused on technology. And even though I sort of stumbled on cybersecurity, or maybe cybersecurity stumbled on me, once I knew what I was dealing with, I had a much better chance of finding a valuable and productive career path. The other thing I would say to students with disabilities is never give up. You know that you have potential. And sometimes there can be setbacks. I hope no one has to struggle. No one here has to struggle as long as I did. But even if there are difficult years, you can succeed.
Thanks, Julie. Mike or Wendy, would you like to answer that question as well?
Sure. It's a good question, and it's probably pretty complicated. I mean, my accident happened when I was 15, and the things I thought about early on after my injury were not so much what am I interested in doing, but what's feasible for me to do, right? With my, dexterity limitations, physical limitations, what, instead of focusing on what are my interests, what are the things that are maybe available, given those limits, instead of thinking about, I'm really interested in this, and then afterwards, can that be accommodated, right? And I wish I had, I guess, allowed myself to follow that process earlier. I'm not sure I would have ended up in a different place, but when I think back on it, I wish I had sort of approached things differently in that regard. But related to where I am now and my identity, when I was practicing law, and by the way, like, a significant mobility disability, people react differently. And I think it took me a long time to really learn to really to adjust or embrace my disability and what it means, and embrace it as a part of my identity. But a big step for me was when I was actually practicing law at my firm. It's called Perkins Coie, big law firm, 1,000 lawyers across the country and 17 offices or something like that. But they had initiated an affinity group for lawyers in the firm with disabilities. And there was a pretty impactful moment for me at our first meeting. I was part of that initial group, where just sort of they said, look, we're glad you're here, right? We're glad you're here in this firm. And we value, the perspective you bring as someone with a disability. And I had never really encountered that before. I'd never, it was kind of eye-opening and pretty powerful for me to really think about, that's right. My perspective as someone with a disability brings a unique perspective that's valuable. And that was powerful for me. And, over the next few years, that was part of what I think got me thinking and wanting to learn more about, I guess, psychology and maybe going into counseling, and what ended up leading me to leave the job, in fact, and pursue a master's degree in rehabilitation psychology and work with others with disabilities, and the hopes of sort of helping other people, see things that way as well. So that was a big part. That was big for me, just in terms of my own personal growth, but then also certainly impacted my professional career path.
Awesome. And then Wendy, how has your identity impacted your career path?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about identity, I think it's important to remember that we each incorporate a lot of different types of identities, and disability is just a small component of it. So I guess, you could default to one identity, but it's good to remember that you have a lot of different identities too. And it's important to not let one kind of take over your life versus the other. I guess for me, I do recognize that it's a privilege for me to have a disability that is invisible, and people don't recognize that right away when they first meet me, and maybe not for a while after they meet me. But I do recognize that also that it did, when I look back at prior to my diagnosis, it was pretty impactful that it wasn't named for me. And when I didn't recognize that this was a problem, it posed a lot of challenges that I felt like if I had just like reached out for help or had thought about, fixing the challenges instead of just pushing forward, I could have saved myself a lot of struggle. And I also don't want to sugarcoat how society views people with disability either, because there are times that it is really challenging. And, being privileged in the sense that my disability is invisible, sometimes that is sometimes a barrier too, when you have accommodations, but people don't recognize that you need these accommodations because they can't see your disability. And so, especially in medicine where mental health is, there's physician burnout, but there's also this huge stigma around physicians who have any sort of chronic illness or psychiatric conditions. It can be quite a challenge to work through those. And I imagine that there's probably similarities no matter what career you go into. Those are things that I feel like, you're gonna have up days, you're gonna have down days, and that's totally normal. And kind of like other realms of people who are vulnerable, people with disabilities also experience their own sorts of institutionalized, challenges where people won't say that they're ableist, but there's definitely a lot of stuff that is ableist out there. And, the most, I feel like fulfilling thing that I found in my career journey is that using the parts of your identity that you feel like you're passionate about and using that, incorporating that into your career, you can build something really powerful, because you can never underestimate the power of your personal experience versus anything else, because that's what makes you unique. So I will leave it at that.
Great answer. Looks like we have a question from our student attendees. Ashley, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hello. Okay. So as someone who has a physical disability myself, one of the things that I'm very concerned about when I'm looking for careers is my mobility and how well I'm going to be able to function in a high stress environment. And I'm particularly interested in pre-law. So maybe Mike, this is your kind of question, but I feel free, any of the panelists, to jump in on it. But how did you navigate the long stressful hours at work, or some of the mobility concerns with your disability at the workplace? And did it affect your disability? Did it affect which companies you narrowed down your search for, which you were willing to work for? Or was it something that you chose your job and then you were able to work around them with the company itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was I've been extremely fortunate to work for firms that were they were just great about accommodating me in whatever needs I might have, including not working full time, right? So when I worked at, let's go back to law school. I did not attend law school full time. So I went a little bit more than half time, probably 2/3 time or 3/4 time. And which actually, served to benefit me a bit, because I had a few more summers and I could do, more internships and things like that. So I really built up my resume pretty well doing law school on less than a full-time basis. But and then I worked for a firm in law school just as a clerk, doing legal research and writing legal memos. And they let me work 1 day a week, and that was all they needed. And that was plenty for me. I was looking for some real hands-on experience. And so again, that worked great. And then when I worked with Perkins Coie, they allowed me to work on, sort of a part-time basis, or a half to, 3/4 time basis, where, and it's very easy to accommodate that, because the goal of, generally when you work at a law firm, a big law firm, they want you to bill a bunch of hours, right? And it's X amount of hours in a year, and so they just reduced the number of hours that I needed to bill each year by the percentage I was working, and then my salary would reflect that as well. And fortunately, when you practice law, that's still a decent salary, you know? So I mean, I would say, you know, working as a lawyer is that career was very easy to accommodate for me. It worked great at a big firm because you generally work on teams of lawyers, at least on big cases. I worked on big patent cases where we had, you know, many lawyers on each case. So I wasn't, you know, it probably would have been quite a bit different if I were trying to be a solo practitioner, right? And doing a bunch of cases all on my own. I think I maybe could have made it work, but it would be something to think about, right? Or if I was in a smaller firm where I was expected to handle 80 to 100 cases all on my own of like smaller, you know, personal injury lawsuits or things like that, or what have you. No, I mean, there's a bunch of different types of practice areas. I mean, you could do, you know, things like estate planning and kind of work at your own pace. Yeah, I think the legal profession can be very, very flexible. Law school can be flexible. You may not finish as quickly as you'd like if you don't do the program full time, but you know, if you make requests for accommodations that are reasonable, you know, you're entitled to that as an employee. So that's, I mean, that's sort of my initial response. I have a number of thoughts about like where and when you disclose your disability and how and when you ask for accommodations and things like that. I'm happy to get into those things. I feel like maybe others would have some thoughts on this. I've been talking for a while, so I'll let somebody else take the floor.
Yeah, let's, I'm sure that's actually a great question to handle on its own. So we'll ask about disclosing accommodations in a bit. Julie or Wendy, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have things to add as far as, I guess in this case, kind of thinking about finding a work environment that was right for you based on your needs and your interests. That seems like a nice translation in that sense. Julie or Wendy?
For me, the pandemic changed things quite a bit because being on the autism spectrum, I'm vulnerable to getting distracted in a conventional office if there's other people in the, shall we say, cubicle farm. But on the other hand, I have thrived on fully remote. And while nobody knows what's going to happen going forward, I hope that remote work, even if it's only some days, will remain a part of my job description indefinitely because I get more done when I'm remote. I'm less likely to be distracted. Wendy, do you have anything to add on this?
I don't have anything in terms of physical disabilities. Unfortunately, I don't have much experience in that realm, but I do know that at least in graduate school, getting accommodations is a very much protective of your, you know, what your needs are. And if you can get like accommodations in writing, whether it's McBurney Center or a similar sort of center for wherever you end up, that's super important because in the end, it's like having that in writing is going to be what protects you when people say, oh, I don't think you need X, Y, or Z.
Great advice. Thank you. All right. It looks like, well, looks like there's another question. Okay, here. So do you have any guidance for deciding when and to whom it is okay to share information about your disability, particularly parts of it that may be invisible? The student comments that they're concerned about that it will change how bosses or coworkers see me. And then there are a couple other questions here, but I think that's a good one. That's the kind of the when to disclose question that was coming out. What is going on? Sorry about that. So yeah, for the panelists, when would you disclose your disability and to what degree?
Well, I might not be the ideal person to answer that question because I have made a conscious decision to go public, to speak openly about it. And therefore, I have gotten comfortable disclosing it at a very early stage. I know the first day I started working here, I mentioned that I needed an accommodating office chair. And because the one I had squeaked and distracted me. But they found another chair within a couple of minutes. There was just a sort of a room off to the side where they were gathered, where unneeded chairs had just migrated. And I found one that worked, and we were in business within 5 minutes, just because I was very open and upfront about needing it. There's advantages to going full disclosure early. And obviously, some people have disabilities that are visible, and that's going to be known right away. There's also disadvantages to full disclosure because that part of my identity becomes much more prominent when I mention it right away like that. But overall, that's been my conscious decision.
Excellent. Mike and Wendy, same question. Do you have guidance for deciding when and to whom it's okay to share information about your disability, especially the invisible parts?
Yeah, I can comment on that. Just given I have an invisible disability, I feel like perhaps this is kind of more specific to my career, but within a career that might not be so disability friendly, I tend to be very much careful and conservative when disclosing my disability, just because medicine has a pretty bad track record of being pretty biased against people with mental health concerns. And so I am very careful in terms of like, if there's, for example, when I'm applying for residency, which is like the training after medical school, they will ask you about, have you had any like chronic health conditions, et cetera. Like I will not disclose that to them, and I don't have to. And so part of it is knowing like what's within your right to like not disclose. And it really honestly should always be within your right to just not say anything. So I think being very careful about that is going to be important in certain situations. And, that can be kind of challenging in a way because it feels very awkward it feels like you're not telling the whole truth. But at the same time, I think prioritizing your protection is also going to be very important, and also having a peer group who you can kind of bounce thoughts and ideas off of, like, is this a safe place to disclose, is this not a safe place to disclose, or having mentors that could kind of comment who are like in your career path, who kind of know like what the atmosphere might be around how friendly they are with disabilities will be pretty important too in terms of just how safe you feel. So hopefully that kind of answered. It's kind of it's not an easy like yes or no in these situations. It's going to be kind of a personal decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree
ahead,
with
Mike.
that, Wendy. Very personal decision. My position has always been to disclose when it becomes relevant. Okay, so obviously I use a big power wheelchair. It's pretty obvious I have a disability, right? I can't hide that, but I don't need to disclose it necessarily in the application process. I don't need to have it on my resume or in a personal statement. However, I might find it to be useful or important for me to have it in my personal statement and disclose it then. When I applied to the McBurney Center, I made it very clear that I have a disability. It's very relevant to the work I'd be doing, help me relate to students, that sort of thing. If I were applying to work somewhere and I wasn't sure if their place was wheelchair accessible, then I would certainly reach out and make sure if I was invited to an interview that I would be able to get in. So in those situations, I think the disclosure is important. I think if I had a disability that was not visible, but I knew I would be requesting accommodations, I would wait until I had an offer or had accepted a position, because I have seen enough intentional and unintentional bias in my life that to know that that shouldn't be part of the discussion. I know they can't ask you about whether you have a disability. If they see you have a disability, they might be able to ask what accommodations you might need. And so then you can have that discussion to assess for, to determine, can you do the job, right? Because that's, what one analysis they're going to go through. Can you do the job with accommodation? So I don't know. For me, it's very much when is it relevant? It shouldn't be relevant at all in the hiring process, unless there's a question about whether one can actually perform the duties, right? The necessary duties of the job. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. If it's not relevant yet, I'm not going to disclose.
Just to jump off of that too, like sometimes people will ask, and just because they ask doesn't mean they have the right to that information either. Because I feel like sometimes people think like, oh, they asked about it, so they must have authority to know about it. And like oftentimes it's not, it's your protected information.
Absolutely. Thanks.
And I guess I would just add one more comment there, which is, suppose you do get hired somewhere and it's a bigger company and you want to request accommodations. Generally the practice is you might go straight to like the HR department and not necessarily to your direct supervisor, in the event you want to keep certain information confidential, right? So you can often work with an HR department and have some accommodations determined that then will be sort of relayed to, the people that you work with or the people that supervise you, without necessarily having to disclose things like your diagnosis or why that's a relevant accommodation or reasonable accommodation. So those are other considerations to keep in mind.
Thank you all for all of the answers there. The next student question we have, and I know we've talked a little bit already about some part-time work schedules and kind of having that type of flexibility. Do you have any suggestions for finding a job if you can only work part-time, but all the job listings seem to be full-time? And we'll paste that question in the chat as well. So if anyone would like to start off with that question.
Great question. Yeah, it's tough. A lot of the jobs out there require full-time work and make that an absolute requirement. But again, I think, and I don't know, I can't say for sure whether this, will work, but you can apply for these jobs and then after the fact ask for a reduced, not to work, 100% FTE. Or after you have an offer, that could be part of a negotiation. I would generally say bigger companies are going to be likely more able to, accommodate those sorts of requests, as you'll have multiple employees who can kind of handle, the variations in scheduling. But yeah, this is a tricky question and it's tough, and I don't have a great answer for where you go to find these positions.
Yeah, I'll hop on there. I think I remember when initially job searching after undergrad, and it was quite a learning curve. And I come to realize that a lot of job listings kind of list like their perfect candidate. But oftentimes there is room to negotiate on some of that. So I remember looking at a bunch of jobs that that required a lot more experience than I had. And sometimes it's the hardest, what's the worst thing that could happen is if you reach out and say, I am passionate about this job, I would love to take it if I work part-time, or if would you be okay with me having less experience, and negotiate the pay. Or sometimes there's a little bit more flexibility than you think when you initially start the job searching process. So I say it doesn't hurt to ask to see if they have that flexibility. And if they say no, then you just move on to the next one. But if you don't ask, then maybe you just missed out on a job opportunity. So who knows?
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to share anything, any other thoughts on the part-time, full-time work situation? Okay, so we have another question here. The next question actually is specifically for you, Mike. I just posted it in the chat. What law school did you attend, and would you recommend it to others that can't attend full-time?
Yeah, I went to law school here at UW. All my degrees are at UW, from UW. And yes, absolutely. They worked great. The stipulations, if I remember right. So law school is typically a 3-year curriculum, and generally you need to complete the first year's curriculum in 2 years, and you need to complete the entire curriculum within 6 years. I believe I was done in about 4.5. But yeah, I think, again, law school, the practice of law, I think is pretty easy to accommodate, pretty easy to be flexible around. The bulk of practicing law these days is, writing briefs, right, and submitting them to a court, and that's like writing writing homework, writing assignments that you're doing as an undergrad, not too different. There is some stand-up lawyering, what we call stand-up lawyering, where you might have to go to a hearing here and there, depositions, things like that, trials. Things are becoming more remote, but there still might be in-person stuff. But yeah, UW was great. They were excellent at providing accommodations for me, and this was back in 05 to 09. Yeah, definitely 2 thumbs up.
Go Badgers. Looks like we have another question from the audience. Ashley, go ahead.
Okay, hello. So, what were some unexpected challenges that you guys had to face that you didn't know that you were going to have to go through? And then therefore, how did you overcome that challenge? What was the most helpful way for you to work around it?
Great question. We'll have that dropped in the chat in just a moment. But Julie, Mike, Wendy, whoever would like to go ahead and start, what were some unexpected challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
I can start us off. So I feel like, sorry.
Julie's muted. It's okay. Go ahead, Wendy.
I actually had to repeat the first year of med school. And that was an unexpected challenge because I think I initially didn't know I needed the accommodations that I needed. And so that in itself was unexpected for me. And then I guess kind of towards just going through that process is also not always a very transparent process. So I think I learned a lot in terms of like, oh, if I need accommodations, these are what I need to do. Sometimes people don't give you that information up front. And there was a lot of like searching for, oh, have you needed to do this or this? And this is how you do it. It wasn't kind of all in one central location. So sometimes it was challenging to find information in terms of like, what are the steps I need to take in order to like get accommodations so that I can be successful.
Right, Julie, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't unmute here, but the biggest challenge I faced when I went back to school was when a class did not have a textbook. I'm a visual learner because it's not that there is anything wrong with my hearing per se, but my autistic brain processes visual information much more efficiently than audio information. And therefore, I am not a very good note taker, and I don't get anywhere near as much from lectures as I get from books. In IT, things change so fast that there sometimes isn't a book available for a class, because none have been written yet for emerging technology. What works best, and this has been much easier actually during the pandemic than it was before, when I had to use a special app called Sonocent that could record a lecture and then play it back over and over in audio, which wasn't very efficient, but it worked. Now during the pandemic, when a lot of lectures are YouTube automatically generates text transcripts for videos. And that allows me to read the lecture rather than hearing it. That has been a real godsend to me.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And then I believe that would be Mike. Do you have info to add?
Yeah, it's a good question. What did I run into that was unexpected? I went to law school with a few classmates who also had significant mobility disabilities, and I observed one of my classmates, I think, experience a fair amount of, I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional discrimination. She had great grades, very smart, in my opinion, should have done well as far as employment opportunities, and they didn't materialize for her as well as they did for me and another classmate that I have. But I also know that my other classmate and I, we were really good about networking and getting out and meeting people and doing our best to connect with. I mean, that's, for anybody who's, pursuing a career in law or most any career, strongly recommend get out there and meet people, because that's a way for, people to really get getting referrals or getting, recommended to for interviews, or just knowing people is a way to sort of deal with that, or to create opportunities that might not otherwise be there. So I don't know how unexpected that issue was. It was surprising to me that she didn't do as well as again, my other friend of ours and me, but but we were pretty out there meeting people and doing other things. So
I'm going to piggy off of that, if that's okay. So one thought I had was networking. Absolutely agree, 100,000%. Like, that was one of those things in undergrad where they talked a lot about, and I was like, yeah, like, it's important, I get it. But then, like, once you're actually in your career, like working a job or in graduate school, then you're like, oh, like, this was way more important than I thought it was. So that's huge. And then two, I wanted to talk about, like, your friend. I feel like not to make any assumptions, but I do think about sometimes the intersectionality of our disabilities with our other identities. And that can be kind of challenging. So for my example, I have classmates who also have mental health diagnoses that they seek medical care for, but then they are also women who have, like, children, and there's all sorts of other, like, barriers for them. So sometimes those things can kind of add up, and sometimes it's, we're each other's best allies. So finding, kind of goes back to networking, right? Like, finding your allies and your advocates really gets you far.
Absolutely. Great answers. And I will remind all the students that you can connect with our alumni, our guests today, to network with them. And so that's definitely an option. There's resources in the chat for how to network as well, if it's something you haven't thought of. Ashley has another question. Go ahead, Ashley.
I just love asking questions tonight. So thank you guys so much for giving me such good answers. I just keep building them. But I guess building off of the networking question, particularly for me, with my disability being so new and recent to me, sometimes it's very easy to feel very alone in this kind of process of navigating accommodations and what I can and can't do. So what are some things that you guys have done to build support networks for yourself so that you don't feel so alone and that you feel confident in going for your accommodations and existing in this this very complex world?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're getting it typed to put in chat. Yeah, sometimes it's easy to feel alone while you're navigating this process. the accommodation process, what have you done to build your support network and confidence in requesting accommodations for all three guests?
I totally remember like when I got my diagnoses and feeling very like scared and feeling like I had no control over things. And that was a big moment for me. And I think it was small steps in terms of building that network. It started out with like one friend and then another friend. But I think the best way that I found to find people who, you know, are allies, I guess, with disability rights and stuff like that is to like find student organizations that kind of bring people who are similar minded with similar experiences together. Those are places that you can really, you know, have a really rich pool of different people that you might connect with and, you know, resonate with, and they might become your best friend for a really long time. So who knows? And then other than that, I would say, you know, just, I know we had the disclosure talk earlier, but if you're in a casual setting and you're just looking for like friends or support systems that are like also using accommodations, and you just want someone to kind of feel like you're in this similar situation, I feel like people are always surprised by how many people actually use accommodations, because obviously it's not something that we broadcast to the world. But I feel like when I initially started this journey, I thought, oh, it was going to be like me and like one other person. And actually there's like tons and tons of people who use accommodations, and you just don't know until it comes up in conversation. You're like, oh, wow, that's like a lot of my friend group actually use accommodations. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Wendy. Julie or Mike, advice on building your support network and confidence in asking for the accommodations that you need. Julie, it looks like you're muted again. Sorry. There we go.
Okay. There's been a number of shifts in my life. The most important, of course, having a correct diagnosis. Before that, all I could say was, I don't know why this happens, or I don't know why I don't pick up on other people's nonverbal cues, which was embarrassing, frustrating. People would make incorrect assumptions that I didn't care about others, or that I was just not a people person, which isn't really true. But once I had a correct diagnosis, then I could ask for accommodations, and then I could also connect with other people that are on the spectrum, the autism spectrum. And that really helps. One thing I did want to bring up at this point, although hopefully we're past the worst of it, is that there was a big shift for me when the mask mandate hit. I tried obviously to comply and couldn't function in a mask because I was so distracted by anything tight. Anything tight on my body is really a problem for me because of the sensory sensitivities. I don't know how well you could see this on video, but everything I wear is loose. So a tight mask was basically a torture device. I don't know how any other way to put it. And that made my disability go from something that's invisible to something that's as plain as my bare nose. And that was a real change. I was surprised how many people in the healthcare fields that I thought would hate me with a passion for being barefaced understood when I explained why. Whereas the people that were the most hostile when I would come into a convenience store without a mask would be people who were elderly And I had to acknowledge that they were afraid. They thought I might, that I was far more at risk of infecting them because I was going around without a mask. And I had to try to sympathize with them and stay as far away from them as I possibly could. That was a big change, and I hope that's past us now. But I'm surprised how many people were compassionate and how many people were not.
Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
Julie,
that.
I think, sorry.
No, please
I
go
think
ahead,
a lot
Wendy.
of us in healthcare recognize that a lot of our patients who are on the spectrum had a lot of challenges with wearing a tight mask. So I think you were definitely not alone in that.
It's always good to know I'm not alone. Thanks for sharing that too, Wendy. I know I'm not alone, and I hope that as we move forward from mask mandates, that people that couldn't wear it are not, that there isn't residual hostility to those who couldn't comply.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience with us, Julie. I think it's good to hear about unexpected support and places where you can get find a sympathetic ear. Mike, go ahead. You are unmuted.
Yeah. So first off, appreciate the question, Ashley. It's sounds like you have a more recently acquired diagnosis or disability, and I can appreciate that for sure. I guess, I think you should feel confident in asking for your accommodations. Okay. And here's why. Wherever you work or wherever you're doing whatever you want to do, they want you to succeed. Okay. And they want to empower you to succeed and get you whatever you need. Generally speaking, whatever you're requesting is probably not going to be hugely expensive or hugely troublesome to them. But if you're not producing at the rate they want you to produce, that's expensive, right? That's the problem. So they want you to succeed. Whether you're in school, like they want you to do well, right? If you're working somewhere, they want you to do well. So, what I would advise in terms of, that hesitancy around requesting or navigating that process is just know what you need, right? Like you're in school right now, figure out how to navigate school efficiently and well. And what do you need? Do you need technology? Figure out what that is. Like, do you need a modified schedule? Like, figure out what it is that makes you the most productive you can be, so that when you are in an employment situation or applying for a job, you can confidently state when they say, all right, what accommodations are you going to request, or how can we accommodate you? You can say, well, this is how I can be most effective and I can be most successful with your organization. So I think try to have that mindset. Again, they want you to do well. As far as building your network, I mean, networking is networking, right? Meet people. If you can find other, folks with disabilities and connect with them and talk through, like in the way we're doing right now, go for it. I mean, that was important for me throughout my 25 years since my accident, meeting people, seeing that they're doing well. But also meet other people, like just constantly meet people, ask people like to talk about themselves. So if you get somebody in a room where you can ask them questions about their life and their job and how have they solved problems, or even just tell me about your practice area, that sort of stuff. That's how you meet people. And then, do you know someone who has navigated this with and solved problems just like you're doing right now? Keep doing that and you'll realize that this is a pretty ordinary thing, right? Reaching out for accommodations and navigating the world with a disability. As Julie mentioned earlier, 30 years ago, it might have been a different story. And hopefully 30 years from now, it'll be an even easier, more seamless process. But yeah, I think keep doing what you're doing right now.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Not seeing any current questions from students, so I'm going to go ahead and throw my own question in here. Posting in the chat right now. Would love to hear, how do you identify whether a company or organization will be a good fit for you? Anyone want to take lead?
Well, I personally, I have a passion for learning. So even when I was a young adult, I wanted to work in higher education. Even when I went into journalism, the ultimate hope was to get a terminal degree and become a journalism professor. When my disability interfered, that didn't happen. But ultimately, I did find a chance to work in higher ed, and I love the atmosphere here, and I love the opportunity to continuously learn.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, there are a lot of factors that go into whether I want to apply to work somewhere or I want to do something. Evaluating, well, first of all, do they have an opening of something I'm qualified to do and want to do? Based on the job description, of course, I'm going to think about those things. But yeah, I mean, evaluate for reputation. These days, there's reviews for everything, right? Google reviews and yeah, so social media can certainly be a friend, but do you know somebody who's worked at a particular place? What has their experience been? And even if they don't have the same background as me, are there analogous issues that they've run into or that they know about? So I mean, I think that relates to networking, reaching out to, alumni networks. Do you know people in this area? Find getting asking the questions you need to ask to get the information you need. I think that's the path I would take.
Those are all very good answers, but the only things I have to add to that are, well, pulling from my recent experience of looking at residency training programs, I look at leadership, I look at diversity of leadership, and how leadership looks oftentimes is a reflection of the culture of the company. The other thing that if you get a chance to interview with them, that's a really good way of judging the tone or culture of the organization too, just by the way that they talk about themselves. And sometimes when asking about, if I haven't disclosed to them, I don't want to come out and say like, oh, are you able to accommodate this or this or this? I might ask kind of an offhanded question like, how do you handle like sick leave? How do you handle if people get sick, or how do you handle like, so like, if say like I was trying to find out about like maternity leave, like I wouldn't necessarily say that in the risk of having bias against women thrown on me. I might ask like, how do you handle like people getting sick for a long period of time? And that can kind of clue you into some of the practices and culture of the company or organization.
I'm just gonna respond that is a great answer, Wendy. Use the interview process to get the information you need. They aren't just interviewing you, you are interviewing them. Wendy is absolutely right about that.
Thank you, everyone. I think that were really wonderful and helpful responses here. I'm not currently seeing any other questions from attendees, but I will take a pause just to see if any come through to the chat. Otherwise, happy to take it away with the next one of my own. All right, not seeing any hands. So I apologize, this might have been incorporated to some other responses, but I think this is a powerful question, especially for folks looking ahead right now to graduation. So what are some things you wish you had known at graduation that have been valuable in your career? If there aren't any responses right off the bat, I can come up with another question too and see if we want to come back to this one later if folks think of a response. So
It's just, there's so much to think about. I think all of us have so much that we didn't know at graduation, and then kind of learned along the way. And maybe part of that is, you know, be kind to yourself, because I feel like building a career is a learning process, and sometimes it's not perfect from the get-go. Like I remember graduating and seeing all my friends go to like all these cool companies right away, and I was still struggling, like not knowing if I was going to get into med school or not, and not knowing what my next steps were, and feeling like a failure. But you know, that's a strong word. But then, you know, now I look ahead and I'm like, some of those people who I thought were so successful at that point decided that the company wasn't a good fit, ended up changing their career trajectories like completely. And so it's not just because things don't work out right away, it's not predictive of how it's going to work out later on. Everything is in flux. So just be kind to yourself. It's a process, and just keep at it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's kind of where I was going. You know, I think there's a lot of stress and anxiety related to the unknown, right? Where am I going to be after I graduate? That's super stressful because it's unknown and you don't know where you're going to be necessarily. So I guess if I remember feeling that stress and figuring, well, I imagine I'll get a job. I imagine things will go all right, but you don't know, right? So I guess what would I have liked to know? That, yeah, it'll be all right. It'll be okay. Opportunities will arise and it'll be okay. So that will be the case for all of you. Like, it'll be all right. Opportunities will arise.
awesome. Julie, just want to check anything to add? Otherwise, we can move on to another question.
Well, what I have to add on that is specific to IT. The tempo is something that will change within hours, sometimes minutes. That's true in all branches of IT, really, because so much of IT is fixing bugs, bringing a network back up when it's down, unjamming a printer, and in security. The tempo of our job is often determined by criminals. When they attack us, we have to respond. And that's something that, in a way, I expected it, but in a way, knowing that this would be the case in cybersecurity and actually learning to live within that tempo were two different things, really. There's a lot I can't disclose because of the nature of cybersecurity, but I have had some situations come up when it's like, I do get those moments of why now? Why now? But that's the career I've chosen. And when there's a need for cyber defense, that's when we spring into action.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Ashley, I see your hand again. Happy to turn it back over to you.
Hello. So this is a question particularly for Wendy. I was wondering if you could describe some more the group that you co-founded, the Disability Advocacy Coalition in Medicine, and what kind of impacts that's had on you, as well as what kind of impacts that organization has had on society.
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this group forever. I'll try to keep it short. So this group was founded by a couple of us who needed accommodations in medical school and felt like there was a lot of institutional barriers that we didn't expect to come up against, and just felt kind of alone in the process. And so we founded this group that really started at Northwestern, and they had reached out to our like academic advisors who then knew that we are kind of more the outspoken people about disability rights. And we decided to form a chapter here And it's been a blessing in disguise, because when we talk about like how do you find people who, you know, who are friendly, who you could relate to, who you could network with, like this was the group where I was like, wow, like this group brought together a ton of people that I didn't know were super passionate about disability rights, because we never had a space to kind of talk about it. There wasn't a space that was said to be like safe to talk about accommodations or safe to talk about disability. And once we kind of opened that can of worms, there's a ton of people who are interested in this topic, and a ton of people who were like struggling, who felt isolated and alone. So I felt like it was really impactful for me, and I guess kind of sparked my passion for the topic too, because I'm realizing there's kind of a need for a sort of a safe space for people to talk about disability. As much as I love the fact that I feel like we've made a ton of progress in the last couple of decades around disability rights, I do think there's a lot that we could still change and make better. And part of it is just being more transparent about the things that we struggle with. And so this group also, while it's still particularly like specific to the med school, we've connected with a ton of other people around the university as well. So I guess I kind of want to make that known too, that it's not just in grad school that we have like organizations like this. They have them. We've connected with groups in the undergrad, the graduate department, who are all, you know, champions for people with disabilities. You just have to look for them. And I was actually referred to be a panelist on this through a committee on disability through the university. So there's a lot of people who are really passionate about this topic that you should definitely reach out to. And I think there's actually a group in the undergraduate sector that is working on trying to create a safe space for people with disability, kind of similar to some of the other groups. Like the Multicultural Center has created a space for itself. I think McBurney and Mari Magler and this undergraduate group are trying to create a place where people with disabilities can kind of network with each other and just hang out. So more to come. Maybe there'll be a future thing that people can appreciate and enjoy. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And thank you for that question, Ashley. And I will just say, as someone who works at McBurney, there are multiple of us on staff who do help advise student organizations. And one of the ones that I advise in particular is called the Advocates for Disabilities. And they are all about disability advocacy and getting out on campus and talking about disability as part of your identity. So please do feel free to reach out, you know, whether it's to me individually or just to McBurney, our more general contact information. We are happy to connect you with resources out there in that regard. All right. Well, I will take lead on the next question. 1 second here. All right, just going to copy this into the chat for everyone to see. What recommendations do you have for working with a team or supervisor that has expectations / direction regarding how things should be done that does not account for differences in approaches or thinking based on disability? And what recommendations do you have for next steps? And that's a loaded question, so we'll give a minute to process through it. Great question.
When I say this, this is so 1990s. But the example I have, like I said, I have problems with tight clothes. And back in the 1990s, a woman in a professional job was expected to wear pantyhose, which are skin tight. And such a big distraction that it was a major factor in my inability to function in the journalism field when I was expected to wear them. And at the same time, I could look at the men on my team who were comfortable, business casual slacks and shirts. But because I was female, I had to wear pantyhose and a skirt. And of course, sadistic shoes. Because in the 1990s, a woman did not come into the office without heels on. Nowadays, comfortable dress flats have become acceptable for both sexes. And I can't say there's a good way. I can't point to a good way I got out of it, because it was one of the major reasons I failed in journalism, was because I couldn't function in the clothes they expected me to wear in the 1990s. But what I have seen is progress in the last decades, where now I could come into a comfortable office or into UW cybersecurity office, and nobody thinks anything of the fact that I'm wearing comfortable dress slacks, a loose sweater, and flat shoes. I think a lot of people that don't have disabilities have decided it's a good thing to be comfortable in the office. So time has really helped me there more than any accommodation as such.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are I've been very lucky in that many of the supervisors I've worked for have been just truly outstanding, right? And very accommodating. And I've really not run into this personally yet. That doesn't mean I won't, but I mean, again, I think, you know, there's tact in self-advocacy here. And I think, you know, when you're dealing with a supervisor, I think, you know, they want you to succeed, right? And they want you to do whatever needs to be done well. So, you know, trying to frame the issue in a way that says, look, I know you want me to complete X, Y, and Z. I need your support in making this happen. And here's how it's going to work best for me. And that's the approach I would take. I've been very fortunate not to have to deal with this directly so much yet. I've been extremely well accommodated. And I mean, part of that's because it's plainly obvious the things I might need, right, due to my very visible disability. But that's the approach I think I would take.
Yeah, so I think I would say that it depends. So always, I think I agree with Mike, like, be kind, have tact, pick your battles. I guess, like, if it's a small thing that doesn't make a huge impact, like, maybe it's not worth the battle. And if you do try to address it, like, be kind about it, and maybe, you know, always kind of go in with grace. On the flip side, if you feel like you're actively being discriminated against and it's like egregious, I would also say that you should keep, like, document, like, keep your emails and, you know, just document what happened. And it doesn't have to be like blaming anyone, just to show that this is what happened and this is how this misunderstanding, or this, like, how the process broke down, this is how it broke down. And that way, you know, you kind of protect yourself and be able to explain if you get in trouble. But, you know, generally, I rarely think that's what it comes down to. Oftentimes, I feel like it's more of a misunderstanding that could just be handled by a one-on-one communication. So, yeah.
Thank you all again. Really, really helpful information there. Being cognizant of time, we probably have time for about 2 more questions. So we do have 2 prepared, but certainly I'm going to take another just brief pause and see if anyone raises their hands or sends other questions through to the chat before I ask my own. All right. Well, we'll go ahead with this next one then. Can you describe how your organization uses diverse perspectives or backgrounds, if at all?
Well, this isn't disability related per se, but one place that I have taken a leadership role in the IT department is what we call DevSecOps, bringing together different IT specialties, which is the networking and infrastructure or ops, the programmers or dev, and the security team or sec. And I have taken a very active role in bringing people together to solve problems that one IT discipline cannot solve on its own. I know it's not disability related specifically, but my experience in needing accommodations and being different from others in the group has helped me learn to approach people with different skill sets, even within IT. I could talk forever about the differences in the way they think and plan, particularly software developers that spend their whole days neck deep in Java or C# code. And they are most of the time moving forward, building something new. So the reactionary thinking of security, we respond to threats, we respond to incidents, is very different from the way they think. But on the other hand, working with them to make software less vulnerable is one of the most important solutions to cybersecurity. And I'm getting a little off topic here, but I think my experience with disability and with being the odd one really helps me as a security specialist talking to programmers.
I like that, Julie. I feel like you maybe take a different perspective than maybe a neurotypical person. And that's super valuable sometimes to have that different perspective that others just kind of can't get to. What I'll say is that, with our student organization, before we opened up the space where people could talk about what changes we could have, there were definitely a lot of issues that didn't get brought up like right away. And then now that we have this space, there's a lot of changes that are being made. And it's really having a student body that kind of collectively says, we have these experiences, and like to be able to say like we're organized and we have a way of like asking things for like all of us is really powerful. And so like having that perspective out in the open will get things done. And so I can give you an example. We're trying to change the process for students who fail medical school, whether it's because of a disability that wasn't diagnosed or because their accommodations wasn't enough. We're changing that process to make it more, friendly for people rather than being kind of a punishment. And then the other thing that we're changing too is we're advocating for disability rights to be a part of the medical school curriculum. Like, when you're kind of at the end of the road of your education, you're suddenly realizing all the things you want to change about how you were taught, about how school went. And sometimes being in that position to give feedback, it can be very powerful. So I guess, just honor the fact that you have diversity, and that in itself is very powerful in terms of how many people want to hear your perspective. And so just finding that platform is really the key.
I don't have much more to add. Where I work, I'm basically serving, the disabled population. I have a disability myself, so I really just sort of bring that you know, and my experience as a student, having been a student at UW 3 times, right, with a disability. So I can certainly share that with my colleagues and so on and so forth. But I agree with a lot of what's been said here.
Awesome. Ashley, I see your hand up again. Go ahead, take it away with your next question.
All righty. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for, coming here today and giving advice on it. Personally, I feel a lot more secure. I've been enlightened a lot about different opportunities, and I just feel so much more reassured about navigating this kind of pathway with a disability. So hopefully this is a really good question to end on. But my question relates back to something that Mike said earlier in the conversation about how you were thinking about picking your career based on what you were able to do versus what you were interested in. And I was just curious if anyone wanted to weigh in, how do you navigate this issue, and what kind of advice would you give to students who think about this kind of topic on the daily?
I mean, my thinking is explore and find your passions and find what excites you and what you really want to be doing, and then don't be afraid to ask for help, right? Don't be afraid to talk to, if you're thinking about exploring an academic program, talk to the folks at the McBurney Center. How do we make this work, right? Find people who do that profession and have disabilities, or look for other online resources. I don't know if you're familiar, there's a website called the Job Accommodation Network. I think it's askjan.org, I think is the website. It's a great resource with all sorts of suggestions for accommodations based on disability type and also based on career type, job type. So, do your go out there and try to find as many resources as you can, but also find the people who can help you accommodate those, who will be there to help you with the accommodations, because there's probably a lot of things maybe you haven't thought about. But again, if you focus on what you're passionate about, what you're excited about, and what you want to do, then find people who will help you get there.
Yeah, I'd say definitely finding a passion is going to be really the key to, getting fulfillment from your career. I'd say, don't discount something just because traditionally it seems impossible. For example, like people with psychiatric illnesses weren't even qualified to go into medicine in the past, and now there's definitely a lot more awareness of it. I have physician mentors who are visually impaired, and you would think that that would be definitely inhibiting for a doctor to not be able to see, but there are ways around it. If you have mobility issues and you want to become a surgeon, there's definitely ways that people have made that work. So if you're really passionate about it, the sky's the limit. They're just be creative about it and try to tackle it from a different angle, and it'll be fun.
All right, thank you all. We have about 5 minutes left here. We did have one final question come through, so this I think will be the last question of the day here. Are there any local employers that are known to be accommodating for different abilities?
I could say UW itself has been very accommodating for me. And I'm, especially during the pandemic, thankful that we've made it work 100% remote in my case, but they've made it work for different people in different situations under conditions no one anticipated. So if I had more than 2 thumbs, I'd have more than 2 thumbs up for the UW on that one. But that has been a very positive experience.
I would agree. UW has been very good to me. In general, I think working for the state is a good way to go. I think the state of Wisconsin is usually pretty good. So, and then the friend I told you about, who did struggle initially, found a great opportunity with the city of Madison. So I think, some of those jobs might be easier to, I don't know if they're easier to accommodate or if they're just better at it or what, but yeah, those are my thoughts.
You don't really have more to add to that. Yay, UW, go Badgers.
Yeah, go Badgers, go Bucky. Go university and go academia. Higher education is, and we are all thankful for this, progressive by nature.
Wonderful. I want to thank you, Julie, Mike, Wendy, for taking some time out of your Monday evening to be here with us. I know I gained a lot of very insightful information, and I know that students did as well. We will be following up with students with some more resources from SuccessWorks related to networking and future events that are held this semester and into the future. But again, just thank you everyone for being here tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.